and welcome to the Wellness with Juanita podcast. I'm your host, Juanita Nagai, an American living in Japan for 20 years. I've gone through some massive life changes and crises in my 20 years here. At its bleakest, I felt very isolated, alone, and helpless in the face of what was happening. I relied on alcohol and cigarettes to get through it the best I knew how, which worked until it didn't, and everything fell apart. I made it through with a little help from my friends, a fledgling mindfulness practice, and learning how to become my own strongest ally. I quit drinking and smoking, worked my way through my grief, found ways to forgive, created new connections, and started a regular exercise, meditation, and self-care routine. I've also become a national board certified health and wellness coach along the way, and developed a desire and passion to help others on their own personal journeys. This podcast is all about change, growth, healing yourself, learning how to get back up after life kicks you down, and exploring mindfulness and self-compassion as incredible tools available to each and every one of us to do just that. Hello, and welcome to the Wellness with Juanita podcast. I'm your host, Juanita Nagai. Today, I am going to be talking to you about the power of positivity. And before you run away and think that I'm going to just tell you to look on the bright side of things and everything will be great and fine and wonderful, that is not what I'm going to be talking about today. The power of positivity for me is the power of recognizing and even cultivating the positive emotions and the daily delights, the little things in life that make life worth living, learning how to let more of those into our lives, into our hearts, into our minds to try and counteract the negativity bias that all of us tend towards as human beings. This is not looking at the cup as half full or half empty, but for me, more a look at the cup and see that it is both half full and half empty, and kind of holding both of those realities, recognizing and realizing that it doesn't have to be simply just one or the other. Although it can feel like that's a choice that we have to make or something, especially right now in the world when everything feels so polarized and everything feels like you have to be on one side or the other, or there are so many very just stark divisions in the world happening right now. This is another reason that I think it's really important to talk about how there are shades of gray and there is more than one perhaps truth or reality happening, even in the midst of very difficult or challenging times, which we are certainly in a global sense, but a lot of us go through on a personal level as well. So hopefully I will be able to explain myself and kind of touch on all of these different things. There's a lot here. It's a topic that I find really, really fascinating. There's also a lot of research, a lot of scientific backing to some of the things I'll be talking about today, but I won't get too technical or scientific because I know that it is much more relevant and it's much more interesting to hear how all of these things connect in a real and personal way. And that is something that I am also experiencing at the moment, going through somewhat of a challenging time myself, dealing with strong emotions that have come up because of a situation that came up in the past couple of days in my own personal life. So everything seems to be coming together in this really beautiful way, as it tends to do when we are open to it and when we have the presence and the practices to support us to kind of give us that broader vision, that little bit wider view to see how they all connect and how they're all coming together. So to begin with, I thought it would be good to just kind of explain how we are not designed to see and let in the positive. Okay, so you may or may not have heard of something called the negativity bias that I just referenced earlier. And that is the tendency for the negative experiences and negative emotions to just stick in our brains and in our minds more strongly than the positive ones. One of my teachers, Dr. Rick Hansen, a clinical psychologist and author and meditation practitioner and teacher, he has this wonderful quote that the mind is like Teflon for positive experiences and like Velcro for negative ones. All of our negative experiences and our negative emotions, they just stick in our minds a lot easier. And the positive ones likewise kind of slip away and we don't hold on to them as much. And that is for a very good reason, biologically and evolutionarily. Our ancestors that were hypervigilant and our ancestors who were always on the lookout, scanning the environment for danger, always looking to see where the tigers were hiding in the bushes, those are the ones that survived. And that is why we are here today. So you can see why that was really, really important as we were evolving and emerging from the savannas. But that still applies to us modern day humans when most of us don't actually face such extreme survival kind of dangers. And we still have that kind of evolutionary mechanism in our minds, though. So now we're scanning the environment and we're looking for dangers. And it's not that we are making them up. I do believe there's usually a grain of truth or a reason, a catalyst that causes us to worry or causes us to be upset or starts that rumination or that overthinking process that we can really kind of cling to. There is usually something that sets us off, but it may be something as small as a stray thought. That we think, oh, we look at ourselves in the mirror and we see wrinkles or we see stretch marks or we see something that we don't like. And that can be what sets us off on a whole lifetime of self-body shaming and loathing. That's not coming just from us. Obviously, things with our body image is highly influenced by the cultures that we live in and all of the marketing and all of the media that we consume. But that stray thought within ourselves might set us off on who knows what kind of a ruminating, overthinking kind of groove in our mind. And the more that we think about that, the stronger and deeper that groove becomes. And it just goes on and on and on and on. And that is with so many things. We might at work have a performance review or something, and our supervisor may give us, 95% positive praise or constructive criticism. And then that one thing that they say that we take as critical, that 5% is what we're going to think about as we're going to sleep that night, right? We don't think about the other 95% wonderful things that they said about us. It's that 5% that feels critical. And that's what our brains jump to and stick on and just grab hold of and don't want to let go. Another really great example that I like to use a lot is if you think about eating out, a dining experience or a vacation. If you try and think of a wonderful experience you've had at a restaurant, like say, what was your best time eating out or something? How long does it take for you to think of that event and think about all of the things that made it such a positive, pleasant experience? But if I ask you the same question, when's the last time you went out and you had a really negative experience? Or what was the worst vacation you had or something? Most of us can kind of instantly think of, oh, that one time when they lost my luggage, or just the other day I went to a restaurant and the service was terrible. We can just go to the negative so much more easily and so much more readily. And that is why it is so important to really let in the positive and let in the good as well to kind of counteract that natural tendency towards negativity that leads to overthinking, that can lead to rumination, that can lead to, depression, anxiety, serious mental illnesses or serious problems that really affect us in our daily lives. And so this idea of recognizing the good, letting in the good, cultivating practices, cultivating ways to let the good into your life is all in an attempt to not ignore or push away the negative things that are happening in life, because that's not productive, but as a kind of counterbalance. We're not saying that everything's perfect and we need to only look on the bright side of things. Again, this is not a just look at the glass as half full kind of a thing. It's saying, yes, the glass is half empty, but there's a whole other half that we're not recognizing a lot of the time. And so this idea of kind of counterbalance is something that there is an author and a researcher, Barbara Fredrickson from the United States, that she has done a lot of research. She's kind of like the godmother of positivity in general. I think that was the name of her first book, but in her original research, she looked at various teams, relationships, companies, schools, places, and people that were thriving. And her analysis showed that the positivity to negativity ratio was 3-1. So we need 3 positive experiences or events or emotions to counterbalance the 1 negative one, which speaks to that evolutionary tendency towards negativity. When she was doing this research, she also found that at that time, and this I believe was at least 20 years ago, over 80% of Americans were not at that ratio, which I think should come as no surprise. So don't feel bad. It's not just you. It's not even the majority of us. And again, that was several years ago. So I would venture a wild guess that the ratio is even higher these days in the United States. I'm recording this in November of 2025, and things are kind of dire there right now. But she showed that the majority of us are not experiencing this kind of ideal ratio. And so she provides some ideas. She identified the top 10 positive emotions that we should try and cultivate and we should try to experience more of in our lives. Now, when I get to this part of explaining all of this to a lot of people, the kind of natural but that comes up is, but what if we are not experiencing those happy emotions like joy and serenity and hope and gratitude? What if we are in the thick of really challenging circumstances? What if we're physically ill? What if we're living in America in November 2025? What does that mean when you are not in a happy, good place? What does it mean when you're trying to pay the bills or you can't afford your medicine? Those kinds of very real, challenging situations that come up every day. And my answer to that is that, again, it's not one or the other. Even when we are in the midst of really challenging situations and having a really hard time of life, we need to honor that and recognize that and feel the feels. We need to feel to heal. We need to process and validate and go through whatever we feel like we need to process these difficult and negative emotions that we might be having. But also, there are still always moments of beauty and wonder and peace and serenity even all around us throughout our days. It's just a matter of learning how to open our view, open our eyes a little bit wider, and find them and recognize them and make note of them. And that is why things like a gratitude practice and journaling and all of these different self-care practices that we hear a lot about, there are really good reasons to do this for not just our mental health, but for our physical and emotional health. So I wanted to share something that, again, the universe making all the connections happen here when it needed to happen. I just was learning about positivity as good medicine in my mindfulness-based stress reduction program yesterday, in the class yesterday. And so I wanted to share just a few of the little notes from that class because it summarizes so well what I'm talking about today. And the first is that mindfulness is simply being aware of what is happening right now without wishing it were different, enjoying the pleasant without holding on to it because it will change, and being with the unpleasant without fearing it will always be this way, because it won't. So I think that is a good reminder that when we're experiencing negative emotions or negative situations, we feel like we're isolated, like we're the only person that it's happening to. And we also feel like it's going to last forever. And then on top of that, we might feel like it's our fault, or we might be critical and judging ourselves that we feel the way that we feel, right? So from there, it snowballs very quickly. But mindfulness teaches us, in essence, at base, that it will change, because everything does. It's not always going to feel or be as hard and difficult. And positivity is good medicine. So savoring the pleasant and practicing self-compassion and gratitude, all of these things that I always go on and on about, they activate the circuits in the brain that enhance well-being by releasing dopamine and serotonin. They promote emotional intelligence and empathy. They reduce reactivity and improve coping mechanisms. And they enhance connectedness and reduce those feelings of isolation. Research also indicates that positive experiences quiet the stress response. They down-regulate the heightened states so that we can relax. Cultivating positive emotions, they serve as an antidote for being with life's inevitable difficulties and the brain's negative bias, as I was talking about earlier. And so at this point, I would like to share what my personal experience has been just in the past few days, because it has really shown me firsthand how all of the practices, all of the mindful practices, all of the self-compassion and gratitude practices, all of these self-care things that have just become part of my lifestyle now, through very intentional and consistent actions, how they are serving me right now. So in addition to meditating and running and practicing things like body scans and yoga, I journal. I have a daily gratitude practice that I list 3 daily delights at the end of each night before bed. And I started calling them daily delights because they don't have to be big, heavy things. And actually, it's much more effective, or you get more bang for your buck with a gratitude practice if you are not just saying the same big things every night, like, oh, I'm grateful for my family, I'm grateful for my health, I'm grateful for my job, or something like that. It doesn't activate your heart center, and it doesn't activate your memory of a certain specific thing. And that's why a gratitude practice is so valuable. If you notice that butterfly that just flew past the window when you were looking out over your morning coffee, you remember that moment, and you get that memory activates that pleasant positive emotion again, remembering and writing it down and then reading it again later in the future. That's much more impactful. And by doing that and starting to practice, you are training yourself and training your mind to look for more and more of those. So you think, oh, well, that's a perfect thing for my daily delight list. I will remember that and I'll write it down tonight. And then you start noticing them more and more and more throughout your day, even when you're going through difficult things. You're strengthening your mental muscle to be able to hold a little bit more and not be so narrowly focused on the negative things that may be happening in your environment, like in your life, your outside life, or in your inner life. So, daily delights is one of my practices as well. I have slowly but surely built up this kind of emotional regulation, self-compassionate defense system, which is awesome because I have needed it in the past few days. I had a very upsetting phone call and it led to a lot of really strong emotions. But I believe that my mindfulness practices and the work that I have been doing provided me with the way to cope with it and to process it. And I'm still in the middle of processing it. This is why I want to share this right now, because I'm not overwhelmed and subsumed in it. I immediately needed to reach out to my best friend, which is what I did. I knew I needed to vent. I knew I needed to verbally get some things out and release. And then I realized I could feel and notice in my body how tight I was in the top of my back, in between my shoulder blades and my neck. I knew I physically needed to release. So I went on a really awesome, hard, long uphill run, and it was exactly what I needed. I knew that I needed to sit with it and not make any kind of rash decisions or react. I needed to then more calmly and coolly say my piece and use my voice to try and express things. And throughout the couple of days since that's happened, I realized also that I'm able to hold all of these emotions. Yes, I was very angry and I was very upset and I can feel it physically in my body. I'm tense, but that's not all that's happening. The kind of mental image that I got was this kind of vision of my wiser, higher, future self, maybe, my compassionate self, kind of holding everything in like a big ball or a big space. And there's a, 12-year-old me that's screaming and kicking and upset and so angry and wants to just react and freak out. And I'm letting her, but she's within the safe protective walls of this compassionate space. And I can also recognize that, I was giggling with my kids over breakfast and that the sun and the clouds and the sky are so amazing out this window right in front of me right now. I'm not letting it stop, or I'm not letting it not let in all of the other things that are also present. So again, it's holding everything in awareness, in mindful awareness. It's holding things in compassion, and it's including myself in the circle of compassion. I think that so often when we get narrowly focused and we get caught up in negative things or negative situations, that it becomes very reactive and it becomes very accusatory. We're either blaming other people or the situation or higher powers or ourselves. We lose all perspective. And so I feel very grateful and very appreciative that this is where this has led me. It's kind of like trial by fire. Here I am experiencing negative emotions, experiencing unpleasant experiences in my life, but I'm not feeling overwhelmed or flattened by them. I know that I will be able to get through this. I know that these emotions will change. And I know that everything will be okay in the end because it always is. And I don't think I would be anywhere near there, say 10 years ago. I think I would just be reacting and sobbing and upset and flailing. I think I just wouldn't know what to do. And maybe I would turn to alcohol or cigarettes or one of the coping mechanisms that I used as a crutch for so many years. So I offer all of that to say, for me, it's this just perfect real world example of the true power of positivity, but it's more like the power of equanimity, the power of recognizing that the glass is both half full and half empty, and that both things are true at once. It's the same glass. They're both right there. And I can hold it all a little bit easier, a little bit lighter. It's not to say I'm not angry and I'm not upset, but I'm not freaking out. I'm not subsumed in reactivity, and I'm not letting the negative flatten me like a tidal wave or something, like just carry me away. I'm still here. I'm still present. I can recognize everything that's going on to the best of my abilities and continue to ask myself, what do you need? What do you need to deal with this right now? Maybe it doesn't require anything at all right now. Maybe you need to compartmentalize it and set it aside, but I'm able to do that. And I think that that is the greatest gift that I have given myself by doing all of these self-care practices and engaging in all of this work. It really, really does make a difference, and it really can be so profoundly impactful. So, how do we then cultivate these positive emotions, right? One of the ways that I have mentioned, I think, is mindfulness practices in general, because mindfulness does just allow us to have that little bit greater perspective and to recognize how quickly things change. If you sit down and try to meditate even for a minute, you quickly realize how crazy our minds just go all over the place all the time. So just even the knowledge that things change quickly, thoughts overtake other thoughts very soon, is the beginning of just having a little bit more of that perspective and clarity to realize things change. I will not always feel this way. It will not always be bad. Learning about the fact that we have this negativity bias and that there are really great reasons to cultivate positive emotions. I think knowledge is power, and it can be helpful just to intellectually realize that, okay, I'm not just going to be some silly Pollyanna, la da da, life is great, because I'm going to just only focus on the positive. That's not what we're talking about here, but recognizing, okay, so what can I do? So again, a gratitude practice is a wonderful and pretty low commitment way to start doing this, even if it's taking pictures with your phone of beautiful scenes throughout your day. I think getting out into nature in general connects us with feelings of awe and wonder on a kind of visceral, of the earth animal kind of level. So that can definitely help. Cultivating our relationships is one of the strongest indicators of our well-being in general. So we connect with others and we feel loved, we feel cared for. We evolved with this negativity bias, but as humans, we also evolved with the mammalian caregiving system. And without going into too much research, the negativity bias helped us survive. And that's why it's stronger, because we need to know not to be eaten by the tiger more than even where the berries are that we found yesterday. Like, it's more important to remember to not get eaten by the tiger. But those berries are also important when we're not facing immediate danger. So when it's not a life-threatening situation, we also evolved to broaden and build positive emotions and to care for each other and take care of each other. We don't survive as a species unless we do connect and care and love for each other, which is something I think that we could do to remember right now in the world. I think that's the only way that we get through and out of so many of these really important challenges facing us as a society and as a planet, is to remember that we are designed, we have evolved to care for each other. And without that, when we're tiny little babies, and if we're lucky enough to live to be old men and women, we need support, we need care. And that applies throughout our lives and throughout history and throughout our civilizations. But I won't go off too far there. I will say that when we're not facing immediate danger, it's those positive emotions that we can cultivate and we build that can be then used later in the future, like connecting with others. So all of those positive emotions like love, gratitude, hope, joy, interest, pride in ourselves, in our families, even in our sports teams, in our local communities or our countries, all of these things we can use later for our emotional resilience and for our coping skills. So some of those emotions I can link to the research if anyone's curious, but there are 10 positive emotions that Dr. Fredrickson highlighted as the most important. But some ideas, even just sitting down and journaling about when was the last time I experienced awe or serenity. Just using the emotions themselves as a kind of journal prompt can help you to remember and to activate those emotions within your mind. Even sharing stories with your friends or your loved ones. When I tell my children stories about silly things or happy moments from my childhood, I'm not only sharing our family history and important information I want them to know about, say, their grandmother who has passed away, or just their American family that they don't get to see very often. I'm sharing that connection and that knowledge, but I'm also sharing those emotions, and I'm thinking about those emotions as well. So simply telling stories can be a great way to cultivate the positive in our lives. Those are a handful of ideas. And for the takeaway for today, I invite you to join the workshop that I am hosting, a one-off workshop this month. This episode will air on November 15th, and the workshop is November 29th. It's a Saturday morning in Japan at 9:30. So it's a Friday night in the US in the early evening. I invite you to join this workshop because we're going to talk in more detail about the negativity bias, that broaden and build theory, how we cultivate the positive when things are not in a crisis mode. And we'll talk about some ideas for how to cultivate them and how we can actually practice them and bring more of this into our lives. And so it will be very interesting, I hope, very exciting. And we'll just dive in a little bit more detail of everything that I've been talking about today. So as always, I will throw the links to the workshop, some of the research that I referenced today into the show notes. I always do love to hear comments and feedback about any of my podcast episodes. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask or share, feel free to reach out via my social media or my email, all in the show notes. Until next time, I thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your listening to my podcast and supporting me. Feel free to spread the word, share this podcast with someone you think might like to hear it. And until next time, take care.